Hi, and welcome to the Azure Backup and Site Recovery webinar. In this demonstration, we're going to show you how to protect your hybrid and Azure workloads with Azure Cloud Technology. My name is Jim Richardson, and I'll be your presenter for today. First, let's just take a minute to introduce Finchloom. We are a company that was born on the cloud, based in Los Angeles since 2013. We're a Microsoft managed partner, and we're in the top 25 partners on the West Coast. We are 100% Microsoft partners, so we don't have any other vendors or products that we offer. Our two main flagship products are the Finchloom Weave product, which is a cloud managed service that includes the Office 365 licenses, plus manage, teach, and support for you and your end users. And we have our Flight program, which is designed to deliver projects and staff augmentation to companies. I'm happy to announce that we've just opened our new East Coast operation in Boston, servicing the New England area. So now we have both coasts covered and we are now nationwide. And the three practice areas that we have are the new security and compliance practice area, which is all centered around securing your Office 365 investment as well as your Azure resources. We have our modern desktop practice, which is all about rolling out Windows 10 and Office to the endpoints, and then getting people to use Microsoft Teams and other components in Office 365 to be more productive. And our apps and infrastructure practice, which is centered around all of the Azure infrastructure as a service. And that's where we're going to be focusing today. So there's really never been a better time to migrate to Azure. With all of the different hybrid workloads, you can step into your migration and do it a little bit at a time instead of all at once. And today we're going to talk about a couple of things that will help you ease your journey into the cloud. So first, let's talk about some of the challenges that a lot of businesses today face when dealing with business continuity and data protection. Number one, it's very costly to protect a data center. You may have to rent a data center, you have to buy hardware to duplicate what you have on premise, and you have resources that you have to use, both human and physical resources in IT to produce that DR capability. It's also very complex, where you might have multiple data centers you have to deal with. Maybe you still are using tape for backup and you have to request that those tapes come back on site so you can restore something. And then there's different management software that you'll have to use to achieve DR. And then finally, with compliance, you may have a need to retain data for long periods of time or provide services. And these are challenging to comply with. So Azure can help with these three different levels of complexity by accelerating your business continuity strategy. First, we can reduce costs. With Azure, there's no need to purchase additional hardware to do backup or protect your servers in a hybrid environment. It's all done through software. There's also no secondary site resource costs. Because Azure is maintained by Microsoft, they hire the resources to protect that data center. You don't need to worry about sending people to the data center to protect your hardware that's being co-located. And you only pay for what you use. So if you don't need to bring up those VMs in a DR scenario, they'll just sit turned off until you need them. So you only pay for what you use. We can help reduce the complexity with faster onboarding to cloud services, a lot simpler execution for testing and failing over and failing back. And this is an integrated business continuity as a service solution. And then finally, for increased compliance, take advantage of Azure's leading certification portfolio, where you can go into the Azure Assurance Center and you can get trust documents that indicate that Microsoft has done their due diligence to protect their data centers and to protect your data. And you can usually take these assurances and certifications and turn those into your auditors or whoever it is that's your compliance entity. All right, so we're going to talk about three things today with the business continuity strategy, because you really need all three of these to protect your environment. Number one, within a single site, you need high availability. So this is when an application has a catastrophic failure, you can just run a second instance. And this has been the most traditional method of business continuity. If you have a server that's running an application, you just build a second server running that same application. So if a disk drive fails or if the server fails, you have high availability on a second piece of hardware. We're not really going to talk about high availability in too much detail beyond that, but we will talk about disaster recovery. And disaster recovery is when you have a catastrophic failure in your primary data center. And that's where you need to have your assets and resources replicated to a secondary site. And typically in the past, the secondary site has been a co-location or a rented data center. And then you go put an exact replica of the hardware that you need in that secondary data center. But today with Azure, you can make Azure your secondary site and you can run your resources as failover to Azure. You can also use your on-premise environment as the secondary site if you've already moved all of your assets to Azure and Azure is running as your primary. So you have options there. And then the third component we're going to talk about is just traditional backup. But today you no longer need tapes to do your backups, and you don't need to send those tapes off-site. We can use simple agent-based backups for legacy on-premise equipment, and we can use built-in back-end backups of VMs that already exist in Azure. And with backups, you can recover data or you can recover full virtual machines. So once you get your VMs into Azure, there's a full set of built-in hybrid services. So if you start at the top of the circle, and you migrate your resources into Azure, there's a lot of things that then become available to you that are real easy to use. The first is secure. You can secure your VMs and apply threat protection and security management. Then you can move to protecting your VMs or your data. You can use backup and disaster recovery. Then you can move to monitoring this environment. There's a lot of log analytic tools, there's built-in alerts, there's real-time dashboards that show you how your systems are running. Then you can configure your machines. You can use update management to push updates to those servers. You can use automation to build runbooks that will automate the creation of VMs or the movement of data within Azure. And then finally, you can govern all this data around policy management and cost management. So you can see what it costs you to run your infrastructure in Azure. So let's start with data backup. Data backup gives you the capacity, actually unlimited capacity, to keep, retain your data and grow while lowering your deployment and management costs. With backup and data archive, you can improve the IT's productivity by spending less time managing and maintaining your on-premise backup storage infrastructure. I had an old friend that I worked with back in the day, and the thing that he used to love saying was, "I can't help you because I'm fighting with backups." And it seemed like he spent most of his day just working on errors on backup jobs and moving tapes and making sure that the tapes go to the right offsite storage location. So that gets eliminated here with Azure Backup. And then finally, with compliance, you can customize or use default policies designed to meet your business or regulatory compliance. So how long do you need to retain that data? How many copies do you need to take? These are all configurable. So with the cloud first backup, we're trying to unify data protection across the enterprise. So you can see here in the picture that the backup works natively on production environments on premise or in your own data center. And you do this by means of installing an agent onto a Windows server, or you can use the Azure Backup appliance, which will back up bare metal and multiple types of VMs, whether it's running on VMware or Hyper-V. Then there's also scalable, reliable, encrypted transport of that backup data into Azure, where it can then be stood up as new machines in Azure or restored back to your on-premise environment. So let's do a quick demo here and I'll show you how easy it is to set up a VM backup once you have your VM in Azure. So I'm going to switch over here to my Azure portal. I've already logged into my Azure portal, and there's a section called the Recovery Services Vaults. So I've created a demo vault already, and a vault is really just a storage location where you can store your backups and your site recovery replicas. So once you're in your demo vault, all you have to do is click the backup button, tell us where your workload is running, so whether it's Azure or on-premise. And I just wanted to quickly show you the options here for on-premise. You can back up files and folders, virtual machines, SQL Server, SharePoint, Exchange, system state, even bare metal. So this often resembles the older traditional backup tools where you could back up an entire machine or an entire application. So we're going to select files and folders, and then you'll notice this prepare infrastructure gives us the instructions to download the agent that's available for Windows Server or Windows Client. You connect the agent to your vault using encrypted credentials, and then you schedule your backup. Once the backups are scheduled, you can monitor using the Azure Jobs page, and you can set up to get notifications and alerts from failures. So that's the one method where you back up on premise. But if you want to back up an Azure virtual machine, it becomes even easier because there's no agent to install. There's no virtual appliance to run those backups. So we'll just hit the backup button here. Then we select which policy we want to use. If we use the default policy, you'll get a daily backup at 5:30 p.m. and the retention is for 30 days. So this is a pretty standard backup policy, but if you need to, you can create your own backup policy and back up as often or as frequent as you need. So I'll just use the default here and I'll hit OK. Then you need to select which item to back up. So here I've got two virtual machines running in our environment. I'll just select this one right here and I'll hit OK. And now it will validate that those machines are eligible for backup. And once they are, I can just hit enable backup. Now the job is being sent to Azure and the backups will be run in progress. Now another way to get to that same backup view is to go to your virtual machines view and select the virtual machine that you want to back up. So in this case, I picked one here. And then down below, you can see all those settings that you get with your virtual machine for operations. Like you can schedule automatic shutdown of the virtual machine to save money on compute charges. Here you have the built-in backup module. You can do update management, change tracking, configuration management, and even monitor this VM. But we were talking about backup. So here's the button where you can click backup, and it shows you for this machine when the last backup was, what the alerts are, what the jobs are. So we've done a pre-check, and you can see up here the job is still running, but we did a pre-check and we passed. So right now the initial backup is pending. So I'm going to let this run for a little bit while we continue through the presentation, and we'll come back and check on this in a little bit. All right, next is data archive. With data archive, you can take your cold data and move it to the cloud automatically. This allows you to reduce the need to keep exponential storage on premise. As you keep data longer and longer, oftentimes you find out that you run out of space if you're using an on-premise device, a storage device. So you constantly have to buy more disk or buy additional storage devices to keep that cold data. But instead, we can shift you from a CapEx model to an OpEx model with pay-as-you-go storage. And then you get more predictable budgeting to keep that cold data for long-term storage. So this allows you to keep your data for up to 99 plus years, and you can pick which region you want to store your data. And this reduces your dependency on that legacy hardware, as I was saying. So that's just a way where you can get Azure storage, limitless, pay for what you need, and store your data. Finally, let's talk about disaster recovery. With disaster recovery, you can protect your IT systems. You can achieve low RPO, which is the recovery point objective, and RTO, which is your recovery time objective targets for every major system in your organization. So most companies, most businesses go through a process where they determine how long they can be down, how much money they can afford to lose during an outage. And from that, you develop a policy saying, well, I need to have systems back up within 24 hours. And with disaster recovery, we can achieve those RPOs and RTOs based on what the business needs are. We can also unify the data management, security, and protection. All of this recovery is encrypted. So as you replicate your machines to the cloud, that's done over encrypted tunnels. We can ensure that apps work by doing failover apps. We can set up automated recovery plans so you can recover within a matter of hours instead of weeks or months. And the way this typically works is you develop a run book that indicates which machines you're going to bring up in what order and what changes need to be made to them once they're in the Azure environment. So you may have to change IP addresses, you may have to change DNS names, but this can all be scripted and put into the automation. So when you declare a disaster, the runbook just does its thing and it automates all of that for you. And what's great is I highly recommend to all of our clients that you test your DR plan at least once a year. But with Azure, you can test at any time without actually failing over. So it's a simulation of a test just to ensure that your replication is working properly and that your run books are ready to go. So with a cloud first disaster recovery, again, no infrastructure required. This is an affordable enterprise grade protection for all apps that you have on premise. So you can see in the picture here, the on-premise environment could be a combination of bare metal physical systems, VMware virtual machines, or even Hyper-V virtual machines. And the way it works is you replicate those virtual machines through a VPN connection to Azure or through an express route dedicated connection to Azure. And once those machines are replicated from on-premise to Azure, now you've got your capabilities where you can do DR testing or DR failover. So we'll be demonstrating this in the next couple of slides. So let me show you how to set up site recovery in this demo environment here. So let me go back to our recovery services vault. And in the demo vault, I'm going to set up a new site recovery. So this, for demonstration purposes, will just show you how easy it is to replicate a virtual machine. So I've got over here a virtual machine that's running in Azure, and it's called Win Server Demo 2. And you can see that that's running in the West data center of Azure. So I'm going to set up a replica to replicate to the East US data center and stand by powered off in case we need it for a disaster recovery. So let's go back to our vault and let's click on the replicate button. Now we're going to walk through these wizards here to configure our replica. So first you have to select what your source environment is. And as I said, you can either have your source be Azure, which are VMs that you've already moved into Azure, or it can be on-premise environment. So with Azure, we select our source location. So that VM that I showed you is currently running in West US 2 data center. We're going to use the resource manager deployment model instead of the classic deployment model. We're going to select which subscription we're using, and then which resource group we're going to use for the source. Now I'll hit OK, and that checks in the source environment, and it looks for virtual machines that we can protect. So I can see here I've got my Win Server Demo 2, so I'll go ahead and select that machine. Now we have to configure the settings for replication. So you can see here, these are the default settings. We've got the target resource group in the destination, the target virtual network, the cache storage accounts, and the replica managed disks. Right now, the replication is to replicate every 24 hours. So we get a recovery point retention of 24 hours. And then the app consistency snapshot is every 4 hours. So you can customize the policy to fit your specific business needs. If you need more frequent snapshots or more frequent recovery point retentions, you can do that here. But if you're satisfied with the policy, you can go ahead then and create target resources and enable replication. So now you can see that the job is running to replicate that VM over to the other East Coast data center. And I can use this site recovery dashboard to keep track of my replicated items and my failover tests and any errors that I might have. So I'm going to let this run for a little bit while it sets up that replica, and then we'll come back and take a look at it and actually do a failover. All right, so let me just show you graphically how site recovery works while it's building its replica. So let's imagine first on the left side of the screen, you have an on-premises data center. And in this case, it shows London. And you're running VMware ESX as your hypervisor. And you've got an application that's got a database layer, it's got an app layer, and it's got a web layer. And within that environment, you've got high availability. You've got 2 servers running the web tier, 2 servers running the app tier. And every server and the database have backup protection. That's what the little blue icon is. So if you do have a data loss or just an individual database failure or server failure, you can easily recover from that using Azure Backup. But we want to protect the site. What if something happens to our London office? Maybe we have a catastrophic internet outage, or there's flooding and our data center has an issue. So that's where we can replicate the web tier, the app tier, and the database tier over to Azure and separate it geographically from our on-premise location. So here we've selected North Europe as our DR location. Now watch what happens here as our on-premise data center has a user that connects to the application. But if there's an outage in the on-premise data center, what does the user do? So this is where you declare a failover. All of your applications fail over and become active in Azure. And through the runbook and the orchestration, we change the IP addresses and the DNS. So now the client is automatically redirected to that cloned environment that's hosted in Azure, and the application continues to function. So that's basically DR in a nutshell. Now, why would you pick Azure? Is Azure right for you? There's a couple things that you want to look at here, both on the backup side and on the DR side. So number one, on the backup side, no more tapes, no more offsite storage, no more maintaining the backups and swapping tapes. So this is a born in the cloud application that allows you to run backups as you need them without additional hardware. You can protect remote offices and branch locations without the complexity of in-house management, and you can stop your hardware sprawl. And with Azure, as everything is metered, you only pay for the storage that you need when you need it. You don't pay for it all up front and then try to fill it up. You pay for it as you use it. So that's the Azure backup right there. On the right-hand side is disaster recovery. So again, no infrastructure required. You don't need to buy a duplicate set of hardware to put in your off-premise data center. You don't have to sacrifice your recovery goals. This supports all of your workloads, including the critical workloads, and it works with what you have today. It's easy to manage. The replication is automated, it's policy-based, and one-click recovery if you have your orchestration done properly. So this is a great way to kickstart your server migration too. A lot of companies, they set up replication to Azure and then they fail over, and maybe they decide they just want to keep it there and not fail back. And then that allows you to remove all of that on-premise equipment and maybe repurpose your data center to make new office space. All right, so let's go back and take a look at our demo and see if our replication is done so we can do a failover test. So if I look up here, I can see that the replication is still going on for a VM, but luckily I've got another VM that I've already protected. So if we look over here in protected items, you can see that WinServer demo is already protected and the replication is done, whereas WinServer demo 2 is still enabling its protection. So I don't want to wait for that to finish. It could take about 10 to 15 minutes. So let's go ahead and click on the one that's already protected, the Win Server demo. Now at this point, I can see a status of the last replication, the latest recovery points, and any errors or events. And if I scroll down a little bit, we can see a view of the infrastructure. So on the left-hand side would be the source environment. It's got a virtual machine and some storage. And then on the right-hand side is the destination where we've got Azure Site Recovery running. And you can see a graphical view of the map showing that there's replication going on for that virtual machine at all times. So now let's do a failover. So I want this machine to move from West US over to East US. I've also got the machine running here. You can see here's my demo VM. So we should get kicked out of the machine as it moves across, and then we can recover once it's up in East. So I'm going to select my recovery point to be the latest processed recovery point, and we have to shut down the machine before we do the failover so we don't lose any data during the failover. So let's hit OK on that, and now the failover is starting. We can click on that button to view the job progress. Right now it's doing prerequisite checks. It's going to shut down the machine. It'll do one final synchronization, then it'll fail over to the east and start up that virtual machine. And at that point, we should be able to reconnect to the server when it comes back up in the East US. While that's going, I wanted to show you a couple of documents here. The first is Cloud Backup, and this is the Azure website that talks about the Azure Backup product. It gives you some additional collateral against things you can do to back up and recover against ransomware, and it's also got pricing details. So simply as an Azure service, backup you pay for based on the instance plus the storage consumed. So if you've got a relatively small instance machine, then you're going to only pay $5 per instance. Most VMs, I would say, run in the middle. So it's greater than 50 gig, but less than 500. So for that, we pay $10 a month to back up that instance, plus the storage consumed for that instance. And if you look down here at the storage costs, there's two types of storage costs. There's locally redundant storage and geographically redundant storage. So your backups are replicated to multiple Azure data centers. But if you're fine with just locally redundant within the same data center, then your first, up to your first terabyte is only 2 cents per gigabyte. So you can see that the costs are very low for storage in the cloud. So those are the initial pricings for Azure Backup. If we look at site recovery, you can see some of that information here, including a nice chart that shows region 1, region 2. And remember, the source environment can be on-premise or in Azure, and the destination environment can be in Azure or even back to on-premise. So it's simple to use. And then the pricing details are listed right here, where initially for the first 31 days, this is free. You can do Azure Site Recovery to Azure, and it's free for the first month. And this is so you can get your orchestration plan dialed in, and you can run a few tests and get it all properly configured, and that you feel you're in a good place to test before you start paying. After the first 31 days, then it costs $25 per month per instance protected. So if we're only protecting one virtual machine, it's $25 per month for that one virtual machine. All right, let's go back and check on our failover. I can see that it was successful. We skipped synchronization. It's starting failover. So we'll come back and check on that in just a few minutes. So let's talk quickly about how Finchloom can help you get Microsoft to pay for some of these entry points or to accelerate your adoption of cloud. If you're considering looking at using Azure Backup to replace your current backup solution, or if you're looking at site recovery as a way to build or replace your DR. there's a couple things that we can do. The first is we'd like to get together with you one-on-one and get our consultants involved with your IT team to perform a workshop. And this can be done remotely or at your office, and we can work together to kind of whiteboard out how the solution would work and what it would cost. Then we can also do a migration assessment where we look at the details of what you have and what you want to protect. We can help you come up with those recovery objectives and then show you exactly what it would look like to deploy this. So those are two options, workshop and migration planning, that Microsoft will often help pay for. The second is the business case. So once you have the plan, you need to make a case to your upper management to get funding and approval to move forward. So we can help you with ROI and build a business case that you can present to your upper management for approval. And then finally, we move into proof of concept. And this is again somewhere where we can help get Microsoft to pay for your proof of concept testing. So maybe you want to just pick one tactical server that you want to back up and do a test recovery, or you might even want to replicate it to Azure and see what it looks like if that VM were to run in Azure during a failover. So that again is a funded proof of concept. And then finally, if you've decided that you want to move forward after you do all of your planning and your discovery and your proof of concept, we can also help you migrate that content or set up a deployment for Azure Backup or Site Recovery. And this also could be potentially funded in part by Microsoft. So these are all the different ways that we can get you there. And then these are the mechanisms that we do. So the Azure workshop we mentioned is business recommendations plus a total cost of ownership plus a value definition. We can do the migration plan and the business case with you. We can help you participate in a proof of concept. These are workloads that can be migrated without disruption, proving that the solution works well in your environment. And then finally, we move into migration, where we work with you to actually deploy the solution. All right, so I'm going to go back here and check on our failover. It looks like all of the jobs are done. So now if we go look at our virtual machine, we can see that WinDemo has moved to the East data center. And so our virtual machine, remember it was powered down. So I don't have that virtual machine running any longer. But now if I connect back to that virtual machine, I can see that its IP address has changed. So I'll just hit connect, download the RDP file, open the file, and we may just have to wait a little bit longer for the machine to be accessible. But once that machine is up and running, then we can connect to it and continue working in that machine or with that application that runs on the machine. Let me just refresh here and see if it's going to show. Yeah, I don't want to waste too much time, but it did move over to the East location. We're just waiting to grab an IP address so we can connect to it. All right, so that was our presentation of Azure Backup and Site Recovery. I wanted to thank you for watching. If you want to get in contact with us for additional information, you can visit our website at finchloom.com, or you can call us at 844-FINCHLOOM. Thank you for watching and have a great day.